The candlelight in the great hall of Ashcombe Manor did not fall the way candlelight was meant to fall on a girl at her first true ball. It slid past her shoulders as if it did not see her, pulled at the feet of the girls in silver and rose silk, and left her standing in the shadow of a marble column in a dress that had been folded away in a cedar chest for 19 years. The dress was pale grey, almost the colour of river stone after rain, with a plain round neck, plain long sleeves, and no lace at all. It had been her mother's plainest dress. Her mother had worn it to church on ordinary Sundays, and once, Nora had been told, to a small country dance in a village whose name nobody remembered anymore. There were no beads on it. There was no ribbon. There was one small mend at the left cuff where a thorn had once caught the sleeve in a garden long ago, and that mend was the only thing on the dress that could be called a decoration, if a person were very kind. Nora Ashcombe stood very still against the column and tried to make herself thin. She could smell the beeswax of the candles and, under it, the faint green scent of the cut ivy that had been wound along the banisters. She could hear the small dry sound her own slippers made when she shifted her weight, and the far-off ring of a spoon against crystal from the supper room. Her breath was quick, but she would not let her shoulders show it. She had promised herself, in the carriage on the way here, that she would not shake. She had promised herself many things in the carriage. Most of them she had already broken. Her aunt had told her not to come at all. Her aunt had told her that a girl with no dowry and no mother, and a father who had ruined himself on bad wheat, should stay at home and be grateful for a roof. Her aunt had told her that if she must come, she must at least wear the yellow silk her cousin Petra had outgrown, because it was better to look like a girl trying than a girl giving up. Nora had listened, and she had nodded, and she had gone up to her small cold room and opened the cedar chest, and taken out her mother's grey dress instead. She had not been able to explain, even to herself, why. She only knew that the yellow silk smelled of somebody else, and that the grey dress smelled, faintly, of the lavender her mother had once tucked between the folds, and that she wanted tonight of all nights to walk into a room wearing something that had once been loved. So here she was, 18 years old. No jewels, no feathers in her hair. Her hair was brown and thick, and pinned up plainly with 2 small tortoise-shell pins that had also been her mother's. She wore no rouge. Her lips were the colour they had been when she was born. Her hands were bare, because she owned no gloves fine enough for a ball, and she had decided that bare hands were better than shabby ones. She had walked in behind her aunt and her cousin Petra half an hour ago, and her aunt had drawn in a sharp breath at the door and hissed, "God help us, child, they will laugh at you." And Petra had laughed already, and Nora had only lifted her chin and stepped through the door and let the light hit her plain grey dress, and had walked directly to this column, and stopped. Nobody had spoken to her. That at least was what she had expected. It was almost restful. She watched the dancers turn in the centre of the room, and she watched the older women along the wall lift their fans to whisper behind them, and she felt, for the first time all evening, something almost like peace. Nobody would ask her to dance. Nobody would ask her name. She could stand here until her aunt was ready to leave, and then she could go home, and she could put the grey dress back into the cedar chest, and she could say, quietly, in her own room, "Mother, I wore it. I wore it to a ball. I hope you would not mind." She did not know that in 3 rooms of Ashcombe Manor that night, 3 men who had never met one another were about to ask the same question about her, one after another, and that the question would travel through the house like a small clear bell, and that by midnight every duke in the room would want to know her name. The first was the Duke of Marren. He was a tall man of 32, with dark hair cut close and a mouth that did not smile easily. He had come to this ball because his sister had begged him, and he had promised himself he would stay 1 hour and then go home. He had already stayed 2. He was standing near the tall windows, half turned away from the dancers, watching the rain that had begun to fall against the black glass. He was tired of silk. He was tired of feathers. He was tired of girls who had been trained since they were 9 years old to laugh at exactly the right moment and to drop exactly the right handkerchief. He had been told 3 times that week that he must marry soon, and each time he had thought, very quietly, that he would rather ride his horse into the sea. He turned from the window because a servant had come with a tray of small glasses of punch, and as he turned, his eyes moved across the room without meaning to, and they caught and stopped on the girl at the column. He did not know why they stopped. She was not the prettiest girl in the room. She was not even the second prettiest. Her dress was the plainest thing he had seen at a ball in 10 years. And yet his eyes stopped, and stayed, and would not move on. It was, he thought later, because she was the only person in the room who was not performing. Every other woman in the hall was performing. Every other man too, himself included. But this girl in the grey dress was only standing. She was not tilting her head to catch the light. She was not turning her shoulder to be admired. She was only watching the dancers with a soft, quiet attention, as if she had come to see a play and was content to sit in the back row. Her face was calm. Her hands were still. The candlelight touched her cheek and slid away, and she did not chase it. The Duke of Marren set down his glass. He crossed half the room slowly, because to cross it quickly would have drawn every eye in the place, and he stopped beside an older gentleman he barely knew, a Lord Hessington, who had once known his father, and he said, in a low voice, "Forgive me." "That young lady, by the column, in the grey, do you know her?" Lord Hessington lifted his quizzing glass and peered. "The plain one? Good heavens, Marren, are you feeling quite well?" "Her name," the Duke of Marren said quietly. "I only want her name." Lord Hessington shrugged. "I have no idea. Some poor relation of the Ashcombes, I suppose. Look elsewhere, my boy. There are 3 heiresses in this room. That one has not even a proper pair of gloves." The Duke of Marren looked at Lord Hessington for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you," and walked away. He did not walk to her. Not yet. He walked instead to the doorway that led to the card room, where his oldest friend was losing money he could not afford to lose, and he stood in that doorway and looked back across the ballroom at the girl by the column, and he thought, without quite knowing he was thinking it, "I would like to know her name before this night is over." That was the first time the question was asked in Ashcombe Manor. The second time came less than a quarter of an hour later, and it came from the Duke of Marren. The Duke of Marren was older, near 50, a heavy man with a kind face and a bad leg he had brought home from a war nobody talked about anymore. He had come to the ball to accompany his young niece, who was making her first appearance, and he had spent most of the evening on a low chair near the fire, one hand resting on the silver top of his cane, watching the dancers with the patient, half-amused eye of a man who had once been young, and who no longer minded that he was not. His niece Cecily had run to him, breathless and pink, between 2 dances, and she had said, "Uncle, may I have a lemonade? I am dying of thirst." And he had said, "Sit down first, child, and catch your breath." And she had sat down beside him and fanned herself. And then, quite suddenly, she had said, "Uncle, look at that girl by the column." The Duke of Marren had looked. He had looked for a long moment. Then he had said, very softly, "Well, she is wearing," Cecily said, in the low, delighted voice of a girl who has just found something worth talking about, "the plainest dress in the whole of England." "Yes," the Duke of Marren said. "She is, and she does not seem to mind at all." "No," he said, "she does not." He was quiet for a moment. His hand tightened, just a little, on the top of his cane. Then he said, "Cecily, go and find your mother, and ask her, without seeming to ask, if she knows the name of the girl in the grey dress by the far column, and come back and tell me." Cecily blinked at him. "Uncle?" "Go on, child," she went. She was gone 6 minutes. When she came back, her cheeks were pinker than before, and she said, "Mother does not know. She says she thinks the girl came in with the Ashcombes. She says the girl has no dowry. She says her name is not worth remembering." The Duke of Marren was silent for a long time. He watched the girl by the column. She had lifted one hand, just once, to touch the small mend at her cuff, as if to reassure herself that it was still there. And then she had let her hand fall again. Her face, in the candlelight, was the face of a person who was thinking about someone she loved, and who was not in the room. "Cecily," the Duke of Marren said at last, "I do not believe your mother. I would like to know that girl's name. I would like to know it very much." That was the second time. The third time came from the Duke of Marren. The Duke of Marren was 26, tall, fair, with the sort of easy face that had made half the mothers in 3 counties consider him a danger. He had come to the ball because he came to every ball, and he had drunk 2 glasses of the good claret already, and he was leaning against a pillar near the musicians, laughing at something a friend had said, when his laugh, quite by itself, stopped in his throat. He had turned his head, still smiling, still ready to laugh again, and he had seen her. He had seen a girl in a grey dress standing very still against a column across the room, and he had felt in the middle of his chest a small clean strike, as if a bell had been rung against his ribs from the inside. "Wren," his friend said. "Wren, you have gone the colour of paper. What is it?" The Duke of Marren did not answer at once. He was still looking at the girl in the grey dress. He was looking at the way she stood. He was looking at the way she was not looking back at him. He was looking, though he did not yet have words for it, at the way the whole room seemed to be arranged around her without knowing it, the way a garden is arranged around a well. "Who is she?" he said. "Who?" "The girl in grey, by the column." His friend followed his eyes and burst out laughing. "Oh dear Lord. Wren, have you finally lost what small mind you had? She is nobody. Look at her dress. It is a housemaid's dress. Do you know how much silk there is in this room tonight? Any one of these girls would come to your carriage if you crooked your finger, and you are asking about her." "Her name," the Duke of Marren said. His voice had gone very quiet. "I am asking her name. I do not know her name." "Then find out." His friend looked at him. His friend had known him a long time. His friend had never in all those years heard him speak in that voice. He said, "Wren, find out." His friend went. That was the third time. Nora, by her column, knew none of this. She only knew that a servant had come by with a small tray of punch, and had paused, uncertain, and had offered a glass, and she had shaken her head and thanked him, and he had gone on. She had smelled the faint sweet steam of the punch as it passed, orange and clove, and she had thought of her mother, who had loved oranges above all fruits, and who had once, in a very poor winter, saved a single orange in a bowl on the table for 4 days, because she said the sight of it was worth more than the eating of it. Nora had been 6. She remembered. The music was changing. The set that had been dancing was ending, and the couples were bowing and curtsying and turning to walk from the floor, and there was that brief loud moment that came at the end of every set, when 300 people all began to speak at once, because they had been quiet for 8 minutes. Nora let the sound roll over her and did not move. Then, quite suddenly, a man was standing in front of her. He was tall. He was dark. His mouth did not smile. He had, she saw at once, very steady eyes, and he was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the room worth looking at, and she felt her heart turn over inside her chest, like a stone rolling down a bank. "Forgive me," the Duke of Marren said. "I know we have not been introduced. My name is Marren. May I know yours?" Nora could not for a moment speak. She could feel the eyes of the room beginning, slowly, to notice. She could feel her aunt, 3 columns away, turning her head with the sharp small movement of a bird. She could feel Petra, farther off, stop laughing mid-laugh. She swallowed. "Nora," she said. "Nora Ashcombe." "Miss Ashcombe," the Duke of Marren said. He bowed. It was not the small bow that men gave girls they were being kind to. It was the full bow, the deep one, the one he would have given a woman he already respected. "Would you honor me with the next dance?" Nora heard, very clearly, the small sharp sound of her aunt's fan snapping shut. She heard Petra, closer now, saying what? In a voice that was not meant to be heard. She looked at the Duke of Marren. She looked at his steady eyes. She thought quite calmly that she did not know how to dance the new dances well, because she had only ever practiced in her small cold room with a chair as a partner. She thought that she would probably step on his foot. She thought that if she said no, he would bow again and walk away, and the room would forget her by morning, and she could go home in her mother's plain grey dress and put it back into the cedar chest and be safe. She said yes. He offered his arm. She laid her bare hand upon it, and she felt, through the fine cloth of his coat, the warmth of him, and she thought, with a small surprised part of her mind, I did not know a stranger's arm could feel warm. He led her out onto the floor. That was the first turning. The whole room saw it. The whole room had already been watching. When the Duke of Marren, who had not danced with anyone in 2 years, led out the girl in the plain grey dress, 300 fans paused halfway to 300 faces, and the ballroom for one full breath went silent. Nora heard the silence. She had spent her whole life listening to rooms, because a girl who is not noticed learns to listen. She heard it. She heard the small hush that fell as the musicians lifted their bows for the first note. She heard somewhere behind her a woman say, "Who on earth?" and be shushed. She lifted her chin, just a little. She did not look at the room. She looked at the Duke of Marren. He was looking down at her. He said, quietly, so that only she could hear, "You are frightened." "Yes," Nora said. "Do not be. I do not know this dance well. Then I will lead you slowly." He did. He led her slowly. He led her as if she were made of the thinnest glass. He led her as if the dance had been invented that night for the two of them, and every other couple on the floor was only borrowing it. He did not speak again for the whole of the first turn. He only looked at her, steadily, calmly, as if he were reading a letter he had waited a long time to receive. At the end of the first turn he said, "Miss Ashcombe, whose dress is that?" Nora almost missed her step. She caught it. She said, "It was my mother's." "Is she here tonight?" "She died," Nora said, "when I was 11. The Duke of Marren was silent for 4 beats of the music. Then he said, "Thank you for wearing it. It is the finest dress in this room." Nora looked up at him, and her eyes were suddenly full, and she blinked hard, twice, and she did not cry, because she had promised herself in the carriage that she would not, and she was at least going to keep that one promise. "Do not be kind to me," she said, so softly that even he almost did not hear it. "I cannot bear it if you are only being kind." "I am not being kind," the Duke of Marren said. The dance turned them again. When they came back together, he said, "I am telling the truth. The dance ended too soon." He bowed. She curtsied. He led her from the floor, and he did not lead her back to her column. He led her to the edge of the room, to where a small alcove held 2 chairs and a low table with a bowl of pale roses, and he said, "Sit. I will bring you water. You look as if you have not breathed in 10 minutes." She sat. He went. She looked down at her lap, at her mother's plain grey dress, at her bare hands folded on the plain grey cloth, and she thought, "What is happening? What is happening to me?" She did not have long to wonder, because a shadow fell across her lap, and she looked up, and a heavy, kind-faced older man was standing before her, one hand resting on the silver top of a cane, and he was smiling, gently, the way a man smiles at a daughter he has not seen in a long time. "Miss Ashcombe," said the Duke of Marren. Forgive an old man his forwardness. I have watched you for the better part of an hour, and I find I very much wish to know your name from your own lips. Nora, I am told. Is that so? Yes, Nora said, so surprised that she forgot to be afraid. Yes, that is my name. Nora, he repeated. He said it as if he were tasting it. It is a good name. It was my mother's name too. She stared at him. When you have rested, the Duke of Marren said, if you would do me the honor. Not to dance, I no longer dance, I am afraid. My leg forbids it. But to sit with me by the fire for a quarter of an hour and let me hear about the woman who owned that dress, I would count it a great kindness. Nora could not speak. She only nodded. He bowed to her, the deep bow, again, the full one, and he limped away. She looked after him. She thought she might be dreaming. She had heard once that people sometimes dreamed the moments before they died, that their whole lives came to them softened and slow. She wondered, very briefly, whether she had fallen down the stairs at home and was lying at the bottom in her cold room, and none of this was real. Then a third shadow fell across her, and she looked up, and a fair young man with a bright face and eyes, the color of a summer sky, was standing before her, breathing a little too quickly, as if he had crossed the room too fast. Miss Ashcombe, said the Duke of Marren. I am Marren. I do not know how to say this. I have never said it before. But when I saw you standing there in that grey dress, I felt as if somebody had struck a bell against my ribs, and I have not yet stopped hearing it. May I know how to find you again, after tonight? May I know where you live? Nora opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. Sir, she said, we have known one another for 11 seconds. The Duke of Marren laughed, breathlessly at himself. Yes, I know. Forgive me. I am making a fool of myself. But I have been a fool at balls for 6 years about girls I did not care about, and I would rather be a fool once about a girl I do. Nora looked at him. She saw quite clearly that he meant it. She saw also, quite clearly, that he was not the sort of man who would still mean it in a week. She said, gently, because she had a gentle heart even when she did not want to, you are very kind, sir. But you do not know me. Then let me, the Duke of Marren said. Let me know you. Behind him, the Duke of Marren was coming back with a glass of water, and his steady eyes took in the young Duke of Marren. And his mouth, which did not smile easily, did not smile now. By midnight, the whole ballroom knew the story. By midnight, 3 dukes had stood in front of the girl in the plain grey dress, one after another, and had asked her name. By midnight, every duke in the room, and there were 4 of them counting a 4th who had not yet spoken to her, but who had asked his hostess, with a peculiar quietness, who is that girl in grey by the alcove? Every one of them had asked. The story ran along the walls like a wick catching. The plain girl. The grey dress. Her mother's dress. The Duke of Marren had danced with her. The Duke of Marren had sat by the fire with her for a quarter of an hour and listened without interrupting, while she told him about a woman he had never met. The young Duke of Marren had asked, in front of 6 witnesses, if he might call on her, and still she had not raised her voice above a low quiet murmur, and still her hands had not lifted from her lap, and still she had worn no jewels at all. Her aunt found her in the alcove near 1 o'clock. Her aunt's face was the color of the wax on a bad candle. Her aunt bent down close to her ear and said, in a voice that was almost a hiss but not quite, because a hiss would have been heard, Nora, get up this instant. We are going home. Nora rose. She curtsied to the Duke of Marren, who was still seated by the fire, and who watched her go with the grave gentleness of a man watching a small boat leave a safe harbour. She curtsied also to the Duke of Marren, who was standing at a little distance, and who had not left her sight for the last hour, and who bowed to her in return. Deeply, again, she did not see the Duke of Marren, who had been called away by his friend, and who was, at that moment, arguing with his friend in a corner of the card room in a low, fierce voice. Her aunt gripped her elbow, hard, and steered her toward the door. Petra was already there, red-faced and silent, and Petra did not look at Nora at all. The carriage was cold. The rain had grown heavier. Nora sat with her hands folded on the plain grey dress and looked at the black window, and did not speak. Her aunt did not speak either, for the first 2 miles. Then her aunt said, in a voice like a knife being drawn slowly out of a drawer, "Do you know what you have done tonight?" "No," Nora said, honestly. "You have made yourself the talk of the county. I did not mean to. You wore that dress to shame me. I wore it because I loved my mother." "Do not," her aunt said. "Speak to me of your mother. Your mother married a fool and died of it. Your mother left you nothing but debts and that piece of grey rag. Your mother would be ashamed to see you flirting with 3 dukes in her old church dress." Nora turned her head then, and looked at her aunt in the dark carriage. She said, in a voice that was quiet but not small, "My mother would not be ashamed. My mother would be proud." Her aunt struck her. It was not a hard blow. It was a fast one, open-handed, across the cheek, and it landed more from surprise than from strength. Nora did not lift her hand to her face. She only turned her head back to the black window and watched the rain, and after a long time, she said, "I will not speak of her to you again." Her aunt did not answer. Petra, in the far corner of the carriage, was crying quietly. Nora did not know why. She did not ask. They reached the house near 2 in the morning. Nora climbed the narrow back stair to her small, cold room and closed the door and stood, for a long moment, in the dark. Then she lit her one small candle and looked at herself in the little cracked mirror on the wall. Her cheek was red where her aunt had struck her, and there was a small line of blood at the corner of her lip from her own teeth. She wiped it with her thumb. She looked at her mother's plain grey dress in the candlelight. She saw, for the first time that night, that there was a small tear at the hem, where somebody's heel had caught it during the dance. She could mend it. She would mend it in the morning. She unpinned her hair. She unhooked the dress. She hung it, with great care, over the back of the wooden chair. She put on her thin nightgown, and she got into her cold bed, and she pulled the thin blanket up to her chin, and she lay in the dark, and she did not sleep. She thought about the Duke of Marren's steady eyes. She thought about the Duke of Marren sitting by the fire and saying, "Tell me about her. Do not leave anything out." She thought about the young Duke of Marren saying that he had heard a bell against his ribs. She thought, most of all, that she did not know what she was supposed to do next. She did not have to wait long to find out. Because in the morning, at 10 o'clock, a footman in a green coat she did not recognize was standing at the front door of her aunt's house with a small folded note on a silver tray, and the note was for her. The note was in a hand she did not know. It was short. "Miss Ashcombe, I have thought about you since last night without stopping. I will call at 3 this afternoon, with your aunt's permission, and I hope with yours. Marren." Her aunt read the note over her shoulder. Her aunt's hand shook. Her aunt said, in a voice that was suddenly a different voice, a soft, almost frightened voice, "The Duke of Marren." "Nora, the Duke of Marren." Nora folded the note. She said, quietly, "Yes." At 11 o'clock, a second footman came, in a black coat with silver braid, from the Duke of Marren, with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside the package was a book. It was an old book, well worn, bound in dark green leather. The title on the spine, in faded gilt letters, was A Country Garden in 4 Seasons. There was a note tucked inside the front cover. "Miss Ashcombe, I have owned this book since I was 22. It was given to me by a woman I loved, who did not live long enough to marry me. Last night you spoke of your mother's garden, and I remembered that this book once made her, who is gone, very happy. I would like it to make you happy too. There is no obligation in the giving. It is simply a book, from an old man to a young woman he was glad to meet. Baradi and Nora read the note twice. She held the book against her chest for a long moment. She did not cry, because she had not cried the night before either, and it seemed a shame to give in now. She set the book on the small table by her bed, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she looked at it. At noon, a third footman came, in a bright blue coat from the Duke of Marren, with an enormous bouquet of hothouse roses in every colour the greenhouses of England could produce. The card said only, "Please." Wren. Nora's aunt received the roses in the front hall, and sat down suddenly on the small chair by the door, as if her legs had given out. She said faintly, "3 in one morning." 3. Nora came down the stairs, slowly in her old brown day dress, and stood in the hall and looked at the roses. She did not touch them. She said, "Aunt, may I speak with you?" Her aunt looked up. "I would like," Nora said, "to receive the Duke of Marren at 3, if you will allow it." Her aunt opened her mouth. Her aunt closed it. Her aunt, who had struck her the night before across the face in a dark carriage, now looked up at her from the small chair by the door and said, in a voice that was neither warm nor cold, but only bewildered, "Yes, of course." "Yes," then her aunt said, "Nora, yes, about last night. In the carriage." Nora waited. "I was tired," her aunt said. "I was tired and I was frightened." Nora considered this. She said, "At last, I understand." She did not say she forgave her. She did not in fact forgive her that day, or the next, or for a long time after. But she said she understood. Because she did, and because a girl in a plain grey dress, who has stood at a column for 2 hours learns before anything else, that most cruelty comes out of fear. At 3 o'clock, the Duke of Marren came. He came alone, in a plain black carriage. He wore a dark coat and no jewels. He stepped down into the small yard of her aunt's small house and looked at the front door as if he were about to enter a church. Nora watched him from the upstairs window, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, and she thought, he came. She had not, until that moment, been sure that he would. He was shown into the small front parlour. Her aunt hovered in the doorway, torn between the wish to leave them alone and the wish to see everything. Nora came down. She wore her old brown day dress. She wore no rouge. Her hair was pinned plainly. She had not put on any of the roses. The Duke of Marren rose when she entered the room. He bowed. He said, "Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace, please, Marren, if you can bear it." She sat. He sat. Her aunt hovered. The Duke of Marren looked, for one clear moment, at her aunt. He did not speak. He only looked. Her aunt made a small nervous sound and said, "I shall be in the next room if I am needed," and went out and half closed the door. He turned back to Nora. He said, "Miss Ashcombe, I will not waste your time. I have come to say 3 things. May I say them?" "Yes," Nora said. "The first is that I did not sleep last night." She said nothing. "The second is that I am 32 years old, and I have been asked to marry 12 women in the last 4 years, and I have said no to all of them, and I did not, in any of those 12 times. Feel what I felt last night when I saw you across the room in that grey dress." She said nothing. "The third is that I do not ask you for anything today. I ask only your permission to come again, and again, and again if you will let me, until I know you, and until you know me. And then, if you find that you can bear me, we shall speak of what comes next. But not today. Today I ask only for the door not to be closed." Nora looked at him. She looked at his steady eyes. She thought about the young Duke of Marren, who had asked her the whole of her life in 11 seconds. She thought about the old Duke of Marren, who had given her a book and asked for nothing back. She thought about this man, who had come alone in a plain black carriage and had asked for the door not to be closed. "You may come again," she said. He closed his eyes for one short moment, and she saw his shoulders drop by half an inch, and she understood, with a small clear shock, that he had been afraid. "Thank you," he said. He rose. He bowed. He did not touch her hand. He walked to the door of the parlour and paused there and turned and said, "Miss Ashcombe." "Yes, may I ask one favour?" "Yes. The next time we meet, wear the grey dress." She stared at him. "Not because it is a fine dress," the Duke of Marren said. "Not because it is fashionable, because it is not. I ask because, when you wear it, I can see you. And I am afraid, if you wear anything else, that I will only see the dress." He bowed once more. He went. Nora sat in the small front parlour for a long time after he had gone. She sat until the light in the room changed, and the shadow of the little apple tree outside the window climbed halfway up the wall. Her aunt did not come back in. Her aunt, in fact, would not know how to speak to her for several days after this, and Nora, for those days, would move through the small house like a person moving through a house made of glass, afraid to touch anything hard. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, the Duke of Marren came 6 times. He came in the afternoons, always. He came alone. He never stayed more than an hour. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring gifts. He brought once a small tin of good tea, because Nora had said, in passing, that the tea in her aunt's house was thin. He brought once a book, but only after she had said she had finished the last one, and he chose it carefully, and it was not fine, only good. He asked her questions. He listened to her answers. He asked more. He asked her about her mother. He asked her about the years before her mother died, and the years after. He asked her what she had wanted to be when she was small, before she had learned that girls in her position were not permitted to want to be anything at all. She told him, shyly, that she had wanted to keep bees. He did not laugh. He asked her why. She told him. He listened. He told her, in return, small things, not grand things. He told her that his father had been a hard man, and that he had spent much of his childhood trying to become the opposite. He told her that he owned 4 houses, and that he did not care for 3 of them. He told her that he had a dog named Mole, who was 15 years old and blind in one eye, and slept most days on his feet by the fire. He told her that he had almost died, once of a fever, when he was 19, and that afterward he had gone up onto the roof of his father's house at night, and lain on the tiles and watched the stars and thought, "I have been given more time. I must not waste it." He told her that he had wasted it, mostly since then. He told her that he did not intend to waste it now. He did not, in those 2 weeks, touch her. Not her hand, not her sleeve, not even by accident. She noticed this. She noticed that on his 6th visit, he had risen to go, and she had risen also, and they had stood, for a moment, 1 foot apart, in the doorway of the small parlour, and he had looked down at her mother's plain grey dress, which she had worn every one of his 6 visits. And he had said so quietly that she almost did not hear it, "Miss Ashcombe, I would like very much to take your hand. May I?" She said, yes. He took her hand, only her hand. He did not press it. He did not lift it to his lips. He only held it, for the space of 2 slow breaths, and looked down at it, and then he set it very gently back at her side, and bowed and went out. She stood in the doorway of the small parlour for a long time after he had gone. That night, a letter came for her, sealed with the Duke of Marren's crest. The letter was long, it was ardent, It was full of promises about seas and stars and lifetimes. It said that he had not been able to eat properly since he had seen her. It said that he had told his mother about her. It said that his mother had refused, absolutely, to receive a girl in a grey rag from a ruined family, and that he did not care, that he would defy his mother, that he would defy the whole world if she would only send back one word. Nora sat at her small writing table and read the letter twice. Then she took a fresh sheet of paper and she wrote to the Duke of Marren. In her plain, honest hand, "Your Grace, I thank you for your kind letter and for the roses you sent. Please do not defy your mother for me. It is my belief that a man who defies his mother at 26 for a girl he has known for 2 weeks will, at 40, regret it in some quiet part of himself, and the girl will feel that regret in the room the way one feels the cold from a bad window. I wish you every happiness. I am not the woman for you. Please do not write again. Nora Ashcombe." She folded the letter. She sealed it. She sent it with the morning post. She heard, 3 days later, that the Duke of Marren had gone to the country, and that his mother had told everyone he had gone to shoot pheasants, and that he had in fact gone to nurse a bruised heart, and that within a month he was flirting cheerfully with a Miss Ismay Grantley at a house party in Somerset, and that by the end of the season he was engaged to her. Nora heard all of this, and was, quietly, glad. The Duke of Marren wrote once more, in the second week, a short kind note, saying that he hoped the book had brought her some pleasure, and that if ever in her life she found herself in trouble of any kind, she was to write to him at once, and he would consider it a debt of honor to help her, and no more need be said. She wrote back and thanked him. She did not then know how much she would one day be grateful for that letter, but she folded it and kept it in the front of the green leather book, where she could find it easily. That left the Duke of Marren. On his 7th visit he did not come to the small parlour. He sent a note in the morning saying that he wished, if she was willing, to walk with her in the little churchyard at the end of the lane at 4 o'clock, if the weather held. He said he would call for her at her door. The weather held. He called for her at her door. She wore her mother's grey dress. She wore a plain dark shawl over it, because the afternoon was cool. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked, in silence, down the lane, past the low stone wall, to the small churchyard where 300 years of the village dead lay under mossy stones. The gate creaked as he opened it for her. The grass was long and wet and smelled of the last of the summer. He led her to the far corner of the yard, where a low stone bench sat under a yew tree, and they sat. He did not, for a long time, speak. She did not press him. She had learned in the last 2 weeks that he was a man who thought before he spoke, and that if she let him have the silence he needed, he would come to his words in his own time. At last he said, "Miss Ashcombe, I brought you here for a reason." "Yes," she said. "My mother is buried here." Nora looked at him. She had not known. "That stone there," he said, and pointed, without moving his hand from his knee. "The small one with the leaf carved at the top. She died when I was 7. Marren," Nora said, softly. "I have not brought a woman here before." She waited. "I do not know," the Duke of Marren said, "what I am. I do not know if I am the sort of man who deserves what I am about to ask for. I have not been a good man, always. I have been an angry one. I have been a cold one. I have sometimes been a cruel one, though never on purpose, and never twice to the same person. I am telling you this, because if I ask you to marry me, and you say yes without knowing it, I will spend the rest of my life afraid that I tricked you, and I do not want to spend the rest of my life afraid." Nora was very still. "I am asking you to marry me," the Duke of Marren said. "Not today. I do not want an answer today. I want you to go home. I want you to think for a month. I want you to ask yourself honestly whether you can bear to live with a man who is quiet, and sometimes cold, and sometimes angry, and who owns 4 houses and does not care for 3 of them. and who has a blind old dog. I want you to ask yourself whether you love me. And in 1 month, on this bench, at 4 o'clock, I will come. And you will tell me." Nora looked down at her hands, folded in her lap on her mother's plain grey dress. She said, "Marren, yes, may I say one thing now? Yes, I do not need a month." He turned his head then, slowly, and looked at her. "I have thought," Nora said, "every night for 2 weeks before I sleep, about what my answer would be if you asked me. I did not know if you would ask, but I thought. And I know." He waited. "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes. He put his face into his hands for a moment, and she saw his shoulders shake once, and she understood that he was not weeping exactly, but that something in him that had been held very tight for a very long time was letting go. She did not touch him. She sat with her hands folded in her lap on her mother's plain grey dress, and she looked at the small stone with the carved leaf, and she thought, "Mother, are you here? Do you see? I wore your dress." And it brought me him. After a long time he lifted his head and looked at her and said, "You are sure?" "I am sure." "Nora, yes. May I?" He stopped. He tried again. "May I kiss you?" She said yes. He kissed her, once, on the mouth, very softly. She could smell the faint, clean smell of his coat, wool and rain, and under it, the sharp green scent of the yew above them. His hand did not leave hers. His mouth did not linger. When he drew back, his eyes were bright, and he said, in a voice that was almost a laugh, "I was afraid you would say no." "I know," she said. "I saw." "Nora, yes, I love you. I know that too." They sat under the yew tree, hand in hand, for another quarter of an hour, and neither of them spoke, because they did not need to, and because the small dead things in the ground around them had said, long ago, everything that could be said about how short a life was, and how much it mattered to be honest inside it while there was still time. Then he walked her home. At the gate of her aunt's small house, he stopped, and he said, "Miss Ashcombe, I will speak to your aunt tomorrow, and I will speak to your father at the end of the week." Nora hesitated. "My father?" "Yes, my father is not a well man. He has not been well since my mother died. He will not know at first what you are asking. You must be patient with him." "I will be. And my aunt, I know." Nora looked at him. She said, "You know what? I know, the Duke of Marren said quietly that she struck you in the carriage on the night of the ball." Nora went very still. "How?" "Petra told her mother the next morning, and her mother told her sister, and her sister told a footman, who tells my valet everything for the price of a shilling. I have known since the second day." Nora did not know what to say. "I have not spoken of it," the Duke of Marren said, "because it was not mine to speak of. But it is why I did not touch you for 6 visits. I did not want you to think, ever, that a man's touch was a thing to be feared. Not from me." Nora then, at last, cried. She did not cry hard. She did not cry loud. She only stood at the gate of her aunt's small house in her mother's plain grey dress, with a plain dark shawl around her shoulders, and she let 2 tears run down her face, and the Duke of Marren, very carefully, wiped them away with the side of his thumb. "Go inside," he said. "It is cold. I will come tomorrow at 3. She went in. He came at 3. He spoke with her aunt in the small parlour for 1 hour. Nora did not know what he said. She only knew that when he left, her aunt sat for a long time in the parlour without moving, and that when Nora came down at last to ask if she might make tea, her aunt looked up at her with a face that was not quite the face she had had before, and said, "Nora, sit down. I have not been a good aunt to you." Nora sat. "I have been afraid all my life of poverty," her aunt said. "My sister, your mother, married for love and died poor, and I saw her die, and I promised myself I would never let anything I loved die that way. I did not know that promise would make me hard. But it did. I was hard to you. I was hard because I was afraid, and I made you carry my fear on your shoulders. I am ashamed." Nora did not answer at once. Her aunt said, "The Duke of Marren has settled a sum on me. He did not have to. He is generous in the quiet way of a man who does not want to be thanked. Petra will have a proper season next year. I will not need to be afraid of the winter. It is more than I deserve." "He is a good man," Nora said. "Yes," her aunt said. "He is. I did not know such men existed. I am sorry, Nora, that I did not believe in them." Nora looked at her aunt for a long moment. Then she rose and went to the kitchen and made tea, and she brought it back and poured 2 cups. And they sat together in the small parlour and drank tea, and did not speak much, and it was not warmth yet between them. But it was, for the first time, not cold either. At the end of the week, the Duke of Marren rode alone out to the small cottage on the edge of the village where Nora's father lived. In a chair by a fire, most days silent, most days staring at nothing. Nora had told him what to expect. He had listened. He came back at dusk. Nora was waiting at the gate. She said, "How is he?" The Duke of Marren said, "He is a man who has been broken by grief. I have arranged for a physician to come once a week. I have arranged for a good woman from the village to come every day. He will be looked after, Nora, for the rest of his life. I promise you that." Did he understand what you were asking? He understood enough. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Is she like her mother?" I said yes. He said, "Then be good to her, or I will find a way to rise from this chair and kill you." And then he closed his eyes and slept. I think, Nora, that he blessed us, in his way. Nora smiled then for the first time in many days. It was a small smile. It was a wet one, but it was a smile. They were married in the little village church at the end of the summer on a bright, cool morning. Nora wore her mother's plain grey dress. She would not wear anything else. She had considered briefly letting a seamstress alter it, add a little lace, take up the hem, but she had decided against it. The dress was the dress. She wanted it exactly as her mother had worn it. She wore over it a very simple white veil that the Duke of Marren's late mother had worn 40 years earlier at her own wedding, and that his father had kept in a drawer without knowing why. The church was full. All 4 dukes from the ball were there. The Duke of Barodian, in the front pew, wiped his eyes discreetly with a large white handkerchief throughout the ceremony, and did not pretend afterward that he had not. The Duke of Wren, engaged now to Miss Ismay Grantley, came with her on his arm, and kissed Nora's cheek at the door, and said, quietly, "You were right. I am sorry. Be happy." And she smiled at him and said, "I am." Nora's aunt sat in the second pew, in a plain grey dress not so unlike Nora's own, and cried harder than anyone. Petra sat beside her, and did not cry, but held her mother's hand tightly the whole time, and at the end turned to Nora at the door of the church and said, "Only, cousin, forgive me." And Nora said, "Only, yes." Nora's father was carried into the church in his chair, wrapped in a heavy blanket, by 2 strong men from the village. He did not speak during the ceremony. But when Nora, at the altar, turned to look at him, he lifted one thin hand from under the blanket and pressed it very briefly to his own heart, and Nora understood. The Duke of Marren was quiet during the ceremony. He did not smile easily, and he did not smile then. But when the moment came for the ring, and he took her bare left hand in his and slid onto her finger a plain gold band that had also once been his mother's, Nora saw that his own hand was shaking, just very slightly, and she felt again what she had felt at the ball, that this was a man who had held himself tight for a long time, and who was, at last, letting go. They walked out of the church together into the bright, cool morning. The village had gathered in the churchyard. Somebody, unbidden, threw a handful of dried rose petals, and then everybody threw them, and Nora and Marren walked through a small soft rain of pale pink and white and old red down the path to the gate. The petals caught in her plain grey dress. Some of them stuck in the small mend at her cuff, the one her mother had made long ago with brown thread. She did not brush them off. Outside the gate a plain black carriage waited. Not the finest carriage the Duke of Marren owned. Only a plain black one, because he had asked her that morning which carriage she wanted, and she had said, the one that looks least like a dukedom. And he had laughed, once, quietly, and had ordered the plain black one. He handed her in. He stepped in after her. The door closed. The carriage moved. She looked out the window at the receding church, and at her aunt on the path holding Petra's hand, and at the two strong men from the village lifting her father's chair carefully back down the church step, and at the Duke of Marren standing very straight by the gate with his cane, watching the carriage go, and she lifted her hand to the window, and he lifted his cane in reply. Then the road turned, and the church was gone. Marren, beside her, did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "Wife." She turned her face to him. "Yes," she said. "I love you, I know, I will tell you every day. I know that too." He took her hand then, and did not let it go. She leaned her head against his shoulder. She could smell the faint, clean smell of his coat again, wool and, under it, this morning, a little of the incense from the church. She closed her eyes. She thought of the ball. She thought of the plain grey dress folded in the cedar chest. She thought of the moment she had chosen it over the yellow silk, and of the moment she had walked into the hall and let the light hit it, and of the moment the whole room had gone silent when the Duke of Marren had led her out onto the floor. She thought of the 3 questions asked, one after another, across 3 rooms of Ashcombe Manor. She thought of how strange it was that a plain dress, worn out of love for a dead woman, had made 3 men who had never met one another turn their heads at the same hour and ask, each in his own voice, the same small question. She thought of how each of those men had, in his way, been given his answer. One had bowed and gone away and married elsewhere, and would live an easier life for it. One had given her a book, and would remain always a friend of her house until the day he died, and left her, quietly in his will, a small annuity she did not need, but would keep for the tenderness of it. And one, this one, whose hand she now held, had come back, and back, and back, and had not touched her for 6 visits, and had knelt in a churchyard beside his mother's grave, and asked her to think for a month before she answered, and had, in the end, been answered. She thought of her mother. She thought of the small mend at the cuff of the grey dress. She thought of how her mother had once said, in a garden long ago, when Nora was very small, "A woman who is loved for how she looks in a dress is loved only for as long as the dress lasts. A woman who is loved for who she is inside the dress is loved forever. Choose the second, my heart, always the second." Nora opened her eyes. She looked at her husband, who was watching her, quietly, in the swaying carriage, in the plain gold light of the late summer morning. She said, "Marren." "Yes, thank you for asking my name." He lifted her hand then, and pressed it to his mouth, and held it there for a long moment, and she felt his breath warm through her thin skin, and she thought that if she lived to be 90 she would remember, always, the exact weight and warmth of his mouth against the back of her plain, unjeweled hand. The carriage went on, down the long white road, between the hedges heavy with late summer berries, toward a house she had not yet seen, and a life she had not yet learned to believe in. Somewhere behind them, in a small cold room in a small cold house, a cedar chest stood empty for the first time in 19 years. Because the dress that had lain folded inside it for so long was, at last, being worn out into the world by the daughter of the woman who had loved it, and would go on being worn in small ordinary ways for the rest of a good long life, to church on quiet Sundays, and to the christenings of children not yet born, and one day folded again, to another cedar chest, and another daughter, and another quiet, undecorated ball. And that in the end was how a girl in her mother's plainest dress walked into a room where every duke in the country was standing, and walked out again with the only one whose eyes had ever truly seen her. Because love, when it is real, does not need silk to find you, and a plain grey dress, worn out of love for someone who is gone, will always, in the end, be finer than anything else in the room,